The battlefield was silent, the air thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burned metal. Pieces of shattered ships and fallen warriors littered the ground, remnants of a war that had raged for far too long. Amidst the destruction, a small figure moved swiftly, his tattered clothes blending with the desolate landscape. His face, youthful and yet hardened by the horrors he had witnessed, was set with determination. He was no older than 10, yet the war had forced him to grow up too quickly. His once bright eyes had seen more death than most would in a lifetime, yet he had never faltered. Not once. Not even now. The boy's name was Kian. His hands, though small, were clenched into tight fists as he trudged through the rubble. He was alone now, no longer surrounded by his people or the army of soldiers who had once fought by his side. They were gone. Lost. Taken by the relentless waves of war that had swept across their planet. But Kian was still here, and he had a mission. Years had passed since he first met her, the alien princess whose eyes shone with the same fire as his own. They had met in the midst of the chaos, when his people had been forced into hiding after a brutal attack on their home. He had found her trapped, captured by the very invaders who had destroyed everything he loved. He had never expected to be the one to save her, but in that moment, it had felt as though the universe had a plan. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Her blue skin glowed in the moonlight, a color that stood in stark contrast to the destruction around them. Her eyes were filled with wisdom beyond her years, but also with a spark of defiance that spoke to something deep within him. They had fought side by side, surviving together, until that fateful day when she had been captured once again, this time by the enemy forces. The boy had promised her something that day, something he didn't fully understand but felt in his heart. "I will marry you when I grow up," he had said, his voice barely more than a whisper as they hid in a ruined shelter, trying to stay out of sight of their enemies. She had looked at him, her eyes soft with a mixture of sadness and warmth, before placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I believe you, Kian," she had replied, her voice steady, though it carried an unspoken weight. In that moment, the promise had felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to when everything else seemed to be falling apart. He had been just a child, but those words had felt like the most important thing in the world. It wasn't just a promise of love, though. It was a promise of hope. Hope that there would be something better after all the destruction, something worth fighting for. But years had passed, and the war had only escalated. His home was gone, his family lost to the flames of battle, and the girl, his princess, was nowhere to be found. Kian had spent years searching for her, moving from one devastated city to the next, following every whisper of her existence, hoping for any clue that could lead him to her. Now, he stood alone in the heart of what used to be a bustling city, the ground beneath his feet uneven, cracked from the force of the bombs that had fallen years ago. Buildings that once reached toward the sky were now nothing but jagged skeletons of steel and concrete. The sounds of distant artillery echoed in the background, but Kian paid them no mind. He had grown accustomed to the noise of war. The world had tried to break him, to take everything from him, but it hadn't succeeded. He was still here, still fighting, and he would not stop until he found her. His heart beat with an intensity he had never felt before. The promise he made all those years ago had never left him. It was the one thing he could hold on to in this cold, war-torn galaxy. The girl had believed in him, and he would not let her down. Kian didn't have the resources of a trained army. He didn't have a fleet of ships or weapons of mass destruction. He had nothing but his will and his determination. But those were enough. They had to be, because the moment he had made that promise to her, he had sealed his fate. He was going to find her, no matter the cost. He moved through the city, each step heavy with purpose. His fingers brushed against the cold remains of a once great structure, the building now reduced to nothing more than rubble. He paused for a moment, letting his fingers linger on the shattered stone. Memories of a time before the war flooded his mind. Memories of laughter, of family, of a life that seemed so distant now. But those memories were all he had left, and they were all the strength he needed. Kian had seen war change everything. His people, his planet, himself. But the one thing it hadn't been able to change was his promise. And that promise was the fire that kept him going. No matter how dark things got, no matter how many times he was knocked down, he would keep pushing forward. For her. For the future they had imagined together. A voice in the distance interrupted his thoughts, a shout that echoed through the ruins. Kian didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He knew that he was being watched, that the remnants of the enemy forces were always lurking, waiting for any sign of resistance. But he wasn't afraid. The promise he had made so long ago was stronger than any fear. It was stronger than any weapon, and it would carry him through the trials ahead. "I'll find you," Kian muttered to himself, his voice a vow. "I'll find you, no matter what." And with that, he began to walk, his path set in his mind and his heart. The days turned into weeks, and Kian's relentless pursuit continued. He had crossed wastelands, braved the ruins of cities long forgotten, and navigated through war-torn landscapes where danger lurked at every corner. Yet, every step was fueled by the promise he had made, the promise of a future with her. But the years had been harsh. As the galaxy's scars deepened, so too did his own. He was no longer the innocent child he had once been. The boy who had made that vow had grown into a hardened warrior. He had faced countless dangers, fought through brutal skirmishes, and survived when so many others had perished. He had no choice but to grow stronger. His body had transformed into a weapon, each scar telling the story of his survival. The small trinkets of his past, the mementos he had kept from their time together, were now all that remained of the innocent boy he once was. He had no family left, no friends. But that promise still rang in his ears. It kept him going when all else seemed lost. Days turned into months, and as Kian wandered through the endless wreckage of what used to be bustling colonies, the faces of those he had once known flashed before him. He remembered the first time he had seen her, the alien princess, with her striking blue skin and regal presence. She had been a symbol of hope, an embodiment of everything that could have been. The memory of her soft voice telling him she believed in him still echoed in his heart. "I believe you, Kian." It was a reminder, a constant reassurance that she had placed her trust in him when the rest of the galaxy had given up hope. And it was that trust, that belief, that had become his driving force. He was no longer fighting for a planet. He was fighting for her, for the future they had promised each other. The galaxy had moved on, but Kian was stuck in the past, haunted by memories of her. And then, a break came. A whisper, a rumor that could lead him to her. A passing merchant, a nameless face in a crowd, spoke of a distant planet, a place where rumors had surfaced about a blue-skinned alien princess being held captive by an unknown faction. The words were like a spark to dry tinder. They ignited something deep inside Kian, hope. For the first time in years, he felt like the weight of the world on his shoulders could be lifted. This was it. This was the lead he had been searching for. Without wasting a moment, he gathered what little he had left and set off toward the planet. The journey was dangerous. Kian had learned long ago how to navigate the treacherous parts of space, how to evade bounty hunters, and how to survive in hostile environments. But this was different. There was no room for failure this time. If the rumors were true, then the girl he had promised his life to was out there, waiting for him. The idea of her being held captive filled him with rage, but also a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just searching for a lost love. He was hunting for the woman who had believed in him when no one else had. The further he traveled, the more the weight of his mission pressed down on him. He couldn't shake the memories of the last time he had seen her, her eyes filled with sorrow as she had been taken away. He had tried to save her then, but had failed. He wouldn't fail again. He couldn't. The ship Kian piloted was small, nothing grand or powerful, but it was fast and efficient. He had made sure it was armed to the teeth with the little resources he had gathered over the years. There was no room for mistakes. Every inch of his ship had been customized for one purpose, getting to her. Days passed in silence, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. Kian would spend hours staring out at the vast emptiness of space, lost in his thoughts. His mind often wandered back to their time together, to the promise he had made. He could still hear her voice in his head, clear as day. "I will marry you when I grow up." The words had been a playful promise at the time, a simple declaration of trust between two children. But now, those words had become the very core of his existence. He couldn't just give up. She had believed in him when no one else had. Now, he was going to show her that he had kept his word. As Kian's ship approached the mysterious planet, he could feel the tension building in his chest. He didn't know what to expect when he landed, if she would even be there. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to stop until he found her. The planet loomed large in the distance, its surface marred by signs of conflict. The once vibrant colors of its landscape were now muted, scarred by the ravages of war. Kian's heart beat faster as he initiated the landing sequence. His mind was racing, filled with a mixture of hope and dread. What if the rumors were wrong? What if she wasn't there? The thought of failing again, of losing her for good, was unbearable. But as the ship descended toward the surface, the tension in Kian's chest only grew. There was no turning back now. He landed the ship near the outskirts of a decimated city. The air was thick with dust, and the ruins of shattered buildings loomed like ghosts of a past long forgotten. Kian stepped out of the ship, his boots hitting the ground with a resounding thud. His eyes scanned the area, every sense heightened. He could feel the weight of the promise in his chest, pulling him forward. Kian was ready to face whatever lay ahead. He would fight for her, no matter what it took. He had made a vow, and he would not break it. The air was thick with tension, and Kian could feel it weighing down on him with each step he took. The ruins of the city stretched before him, a vast wasteland where once life and laughter had thrived. Now, all that remained were shadows of what had been. But through the smoke and ruin, a new fire ignited within him, the determination to find her. Nothing else mattered. He had followed the whispers, the rumors, and the countless trails that had led him here. Every piece of information had pointed to one conclusion. She was here. Somewhere in this forsaken city, the alien princess who had once filled his life with hope and promise was held captive, a prisoner of some faceless, brutal enemy. As Kian moved deeper into the city, he took cover behind the shattered remnants of a building. His hand instinctively gripped the hilt of his weapon, the sharp metal a reminder that this mission was no longer just a search. This was war. He had spent years training, becoming something more than a boy who had made a promise. Now, he was a soldier, hardened by the galaxy's cruel realities, ready to do whatever it took to complete his mission. He could feel the presence of enemy soldiers nearby. Their patrols were irregular but frequent. It didn't take a genius to realize that the enemy was well aware of their surroundings. Kian was going to have to be smart. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Peeking around the corner, Kian spotted them. The soldiers were a mix of alien species, their armor designed for quick maneuvering and brutal efficiency. They were searching the area, unaware that their target was only a few steps away. Kian's heart raced, but his mind remained calm. He had trained for this moment, and he would not let fear take over. With a deep breath, Kian moved swiftly, blending into the shadows. His body moved with purpose, his every motion calculated and precise. As he approached the enemy, he heard their voices, a mix of alien dialects and gruff commands. He didn't understand their language, but their tone was all too familiar. Arrogance, confidence, the kind that came from years of subjugation and conquest. Kian's thoughts flashed to her, to the last time they had been together. Her blue skin, her smile, her laughter. She had been the symbol of hope for an entire galaxy, an emblem of what they could achieve if only they worked together. But now, she was a prisoner, a tool to be used, exploited, and discarded by those who thought they could control her. Not on his watch. With a sudden burst of speed, Kian closed the gap between him and the nearest soldier. He lunged forward, grabbing the soldier's arm and twisting it in a way that made the alien cry out in pain. The soldier was strong, but Kian had the element of surprise on his side. In a swift motion, he slammed the soldier into the ground, knocking him unconscious. The others turned at the noise, but Kian was already moving again, quick as a shadow. He used his speed to his advantage, striking the next soldier before they even had a chance to react. A swift strike to the neck, and the enemy crumpled to the ground. 2 down, 3 to go. Kian's heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind remained sharp. He could hear the remaining soldiers scrambling, calling for reinforcements. He had no time to waste. The princess was close. He moved quickly, disabling the last 2 guards with precise strikes. In a matter of seconds, the enemy soldiers were all incapacitated, lying in various states of unconsciousness or pain. Kian stood over them, breathing heavily, but he didn't let himself relax, not yet. He knew there was more to come. He couldn't let his guard down, not when she was so close. Kian sprinted through the streets, his heart racing as the adrenaline coursed through his veins. He could feel the pulse of the city around him, the weight of its history and its destruction. This place had seen countless battles, countless sacrifices. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was reaching her. He finally arrived at what appeared to be the heart of the enemy's stronghold. It was a dark, foreboding structure with high walls and heavy security. This was where she was being held. But Kian wasn't alone. As he approached, he heard the sound of boots on the ground, enemy soldiers closing in. They had caught wind of his presence, and reinforcements were on the way. Kian's mind raced. He couldn't let them stop him now. In the distance, he saw a figure, a tall, imposing guard standing at the entrance to the building. He was armed with a massive energy rifle, and his stance suggested that he was no ordinary soldier. This was the kind of opponent Kian had been expecting, someone who had been trained for situations like this. But Kian didn't hesitate. He moved into action, his weapon drawn and ready. The battle was about to begin, but Kian's focus never wavered. All that mattered was reaching her. The guard didn't move. Kian stood in the center of the broken courtyard, breathing hard, his body coiled like a spring. The massive alien, 8 feet tall and wrapped in heavy armor, held a staff-like energy weapon that crackled with raw blue plasma. His gaze was cold, mechanical. This wasn't just a soldier. This was a warden, a war beast bred for nothing but defense and punishment. "You're trespassing," the alien rumbled. "Turn around or be turned into a smear." Kian didn't flinch. "I'm here for her." That made the guard tilt his head slightly. "Curious." "The blue one? The fallen heir?" A low laugh. "She cried when we took her crown. I doubt she remembers you." "She does," Kian said calmly, stepping forward, slowly. "And if she doesn't, I'll remind her, after I drag you through that wall." The warden moved first, faster than something his size should be allowed to move. But Kian didn't back down. He ducked under the sweeping staff and jabbed upward with his blade, striking sparks from the armor but not breaking through. The recoil knocked Kian back, and he rolled with it, coming up into a crouch. His ribs ached. That strike would have killed a lesser man. But Kian wasn't here to die. He was here to end this. The fight dragged into the corridor, each impact echoing through the stronghold's stone walls. Kian landed a few solid blows, but it was his mind, not muscle, that turned the tide. He tricked the guard into slamming the staff into a control panel. The lights above them shorted, the power flickered, and behind the wall, he heard a hiss. A prison door was opening. Kian ducked the next attack and ran. Not away from the fight, but toward his purpose. Down the hall, cells lined the walls. The dim red lights glowed faintly behind the thick glass. Most of the cells were empty, silent. But then he saw her. Cell 7B. She sat in the center, her legs folded beneath her, her long hair matted, her blue skin dulled by weeks, maybe months, of captivity. But even through the dirt, her eyes still burned gold, as if her spirit had never truly dimmed. She looked up when the door slid open. "Kian." That one word stopped him in his tracks. Her voice was cracked and soft, but alive. "You remembered me," he whispered. "You came back," she said, rising to her feet, stumbling slightly. "You really came." He crossed the cell and caught her before she fell. For a second, time stopped. The weight of war, of years apart, of childhood promises, none of it mattered. She was in his arms again, and he wasn't letting go. "I made a promise," Kian said. "I was just a boy, but I meant it." She smiled faintly. "So did I." Alarms blared suddenly, sharp, shrill, deafening. Red lights flashed along the corridor. The warden wasn't done. Kian helped her to her feet. "Can you walk?" "I can fight." Of course she could. She grabbed a fallen guard's sidearm from outside her cell. "Let's go finish this." As they ran together through the chaos, side by side, something shifted, not just in them, but in the battle itself. The stronghold's walls trembled. Enemy soldiers poured in from every direction, but they weren't ready for what they saw. A human and an alien royal tearing through them together, moving like lightning, like prophecy. Because word was spreading. The girl they thought was broken had been rescued, not by an army, not by a fleet, by one single human who had once made a promise with the innocence of a child and now fulfilled it with the strength of a warrior. By the time they reached the rooftop extraction point, smoke and fire trailed behind them. Gunships circled. A rebellion flag was raised atop the broken fortress. And as they stood there, her wrapped in Kian's arm, defiant and beautiful, soldiers began to kneel. Not just for her. For him. The flagship hovered just beyond the scorched cliffs, a symbol of resistance once dismissed, now blazing bright in the dark sky. The extraction team landed hard, rotors chopping through the smoke as armored figures poured out to form a perimeter around Kian and the alien girl, Zyra, the lost heir. No one questioned who she was anymore. The soldiers didn't just salute. They stepped back, made way, and watched with silent reverence. Word had already spread through the network. The lost princess had returned. But more importantly, she hadn't come back alone. She came with him. Kian held her hand tightly as they stepped into the gunship. Her fingers trembled in his grasp, but her eyes burned with renewed fire. The girl who'd been dragged away in chains had returned with an army behind her and one man in front who refused to let her fall again. Inside the command deck, murmurs stopped when they entered. The rebel general stood, her eyes wide as she took in Zyra's condition and Kian's presence beside her. "You did it," the general whispered. "Alone." "No one is ever alone," Kian replied quietly, looking at Zyra. "Not when you keep your promises." Zyra turned to the gathered command team. "The chains are broken. The warden is dead. The stronghold is ours." "You're ready," said the general. "We can put you back on the throne." Zyra looked toward Kian, as if the question had to pass through him first. He gave a single nod. "It's time." They didn't waste another moment. The next few days blurred into planning, strategic strikes, communications bursts to resistance cells across star systems. Kian never left Zyra's side. Not when she stood before thousands of troops declaring her return, not when she revealed the crimes committed by her own corrupted family, not when she tore down the ancient banner of her fallen house and replaced it with the sigil of something new. Freedom, unity, fire. She didn't reclaim a throne. She rebuilt it, made it something no longer ruled by bloodlines, but by choice. And when it was done, when the last of the imperial flags burned and the people cheered her name across the galaxies, Zyra walked down the marble steps of the new capital's high tower. She found Kian standing alone at the edge of the garden where he'd once knelt as a child. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "I'd keep it again," Kian replied. 1,000 times. Zyra held out her hand. This time, he didn't kneel. He stepped forward, and with quiet, steady hands, she placed a thin band of silver on his finger. It shimmered in the light, etched with the symbols of both their worlds, hers for royalty, his for courage. "Not because you saved me," she said, "but because you stood beside me even when the world had forgotten me." Their lips met in the soft silence of the garden, and when they parted, the stars above shimmered like they knew something historic had happened. Because a promise made by a little boy had changed the course of a galactic empire. And a war born from power ended in love forged in fire. The galaxy would remember, not the war, not the throne, but the vow.